The city buses in Amber Lane always ran on time, except on the days when they didn't. And today, of all days, the 7:45 a.m. bus decided to break its perfect record. Alma stood among the restless crowd, clutching her bag to her chest as the drizzle turned into an irritated mist. Everything felt heavier than it should have, her bag, the air, her thoughts. She had been up half the night worrying about her job interview at the hospital. It wasn't just any job, it was the first stepping stone to the life she dreamed of building after years of working small shifts and odd hours. She had ironed her shirt twice, rehearsed answers until they lost meaning, and still woken up with fear sitting in her throat. Now, as the rain thickened and the minutes ticked past 7:45, she felt the familiar curl of anxiety tighten around her. Most people at the bus stop were frustrated, stamping their feet and checking their watches. A few muttered complaints about the lateness, and the energy of impatience moved through the group like a storm of its own. Alma kept her eyes down. She didn't want to absorb it. She already had enough of her own worries to carry. Finally, at 8:02, the bus came groaning around the corner, squeaking as it pulled up. The doors opened, and the crowd surged forward. Alma slipped inside and found a spot near the middle. Her hair was damp from the rain, sticking to her forehead, and the morning cold clung to her clothes. She hugged her bag tighter, wishing her heart would slow down. As the bus lurched forward, she noticed a man sitting across from her. He looked older, maybe in his 60s, with a face creased deeply around the eyes and mouth. His clothes were neat but worn, like they had lived many days of hard work. He held a small lunchbox on his lap and stared out the window with a heaviness that Alma instantly recognized, the heaviness of someone carrying something too big for the world to see. The bus hit a pothole, jolting everyone forward. Alma grabbed the pole just in time, but her bag slid and fell open, spilling papers and a small folder across the floor. "Oh no, no, no," she whispered, bending down. A few passengers glanced but didn't move. People were busy. People were tired. This city taught everyone to mind their own business. But before Alma could gather everything, a pair of hands gently reached down. "Here," the older man said softly, handing her the scattered sheets. He picked them up with care, as though each paper mattered. "Looks important." A small warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said, tucking them back into her bag. "They are. I have an interview today." He nodded slowly. "A big one." "Yeah," she breathed. "A really big one." "Then you'll do fine." His tone was so certain that Alma felt her throat tighten. She forced a small smile, trying to contain the emotion that rose unexpectedly. He smiled back, slow, gentle, patient, and something about it said he understood fear and hope in equal measure. The bus carried on through the wet streets, stopping and starting as more people boarded. The noise grew, phones ringing, shoes squeaking on the damp floor, conversations overlapping, but the older man remained still, his hands folded over his lunchbox. Alma found her gaze drifting toward him again and again. Not because he was strange, but because he radiated something she desperately needed that morning, calmness. At the next stop, a teenage boy wearing headphones entered the bus, shivering and dripping from the rain. He seemed lost, scanning the crowded space for somewhere to stand. When the bus jerked forward unexpectedly, the boy stumbled. Alma reached out instinctively, steadying him by the arm. "Thanks," he said, embarrassed. "No problem," she replied, offering a quick smile. He nodded, skipped past her, and steadied himself near the back. It was a small moment, but she felt better for it. A little more present. A little less tangled inside. The bus continued down the main road until suddenly it slowed and then stopped completely. The engine groaned. People exchanged looks. After a few seconds, the driver announced, "Sorry, folks. Looks like the engine's overheated. I've called for backup, but it might take a while." A collective groan filled the bus. People grabbed their phones, sending frantic messages. Alma's stomach dropped. She couldn't be late. Not today. Not when she had worked years for this chance. The older man looked at her again, noticing the panic growing on her face. "How far do you need to go?" he asked. "The hospital," she whispered. "That's still a good 20-minute ride," someone nearby chimed in. Alma felt her throat tighten. She blinked hard, trying not to let tears form. The last thing she needed was to cry in front of strangers. After a moment of silence, the older man stood up. "I'm getting off here," he said to the driver. "It's not that far for me. Anyone else want to walk or catch another bus nearby?" Alma hesitated. Walking in the rain meant arriving soaked. Catching another bus meant waiting again. She didn't have the time. The man looked at her with that same gentle steadiness. "You'll get there," he said. "Don't let this stop you. One delay doesn't decide your day." Something about the certainty in his eyes softened her panic. She took a breath. "You're right," she whispered. She gave him a grateful smile, a real one this time, full of something deeper. He smiled back at her, slow and reassuring, and somehow that simple expression felt like a hand steadying her from the inside. Passengers began getting off the stalled bus. Alma followed, holding her bag under her jacket. She spotted a taxi further down the road, dropping someone off. Her pulse quickened. She jogged toward it, waving her hand. The driver rolled down the window. "You need a ride?" "Yes." "The City General Hospital, please." "As fast as possible." The driver nodded, unlocking the door. "Hop in." As the taxi pulled away, Alma glanced back toward the broken-down bus. The older man was standing nearby under a tree, waiting for a lull in the rain before crossing the street. He looked up just as the taxi passed and Alma, without thinking, smiled at him again. He lifted his hand slightly and smiled back. Just a small expression, but one that warmed the morning more than the sun could have if it were shining. Inside the taxi, Alma felt her shoulders loosening. That smile, that simple kindness from a stranger, had eased something deep within her, a knot of fear she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. The taxi driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Bad morning." "Was," she said, "but it's getting better." "Good," he said simply. Sometimes that's all it takes. When the taxi reached the hospital, Alma rushed inside, dripping rainwater everywhere. She checked in at the reception and hurried to the waiting area. When the interviewers called her name, she took a deep breath and walked in, repeating the older man's words in her mind, "One delay doesn't decide your day." The interview began stiffly, her nerves still buzzing, but as the questions continued, Alma found her rhythm. She spoke about her experiences, the struggles she'd faced, and her desire to help people. She felt genuine. Grounded. Like someone who knew what she had to offer. At the end, the lead interviewer smiled. "We'll be in touch soon. Thank you for your time." On the bus he had boarded earlier, he had been on his way to visit the hospital too, not for an interview, not for a job, but for a follow-up appointment after losing his wife 2 months earlier. The grief had been suffocating, and most mornings he found it hard to get out of bed. Today had been especially difficult. He had packed his lunchbox out of habit, not hunger. He had boarded the bus because his wife would have wanted him to keep going, even if the days felt empty. And when the bus broke down, he had been seconds from turning around and going home. Giving up. Letting the rain swallow his attempt at living. But then he had seen Alma, nervous, overwhelmed, holding back tears, and her smile, the one she offered him after he helped pick up her papers, felt like a small ray of warmth in a sky full of storm clouds. It reminded him that even in grief, he could still matter in small ways. That kindness didn't end with loss. That a stranger's gratitude could be enough to carry him through another day. So when she smiled at him again from the taxi window, it felt like the world nudging him forward, telling him gently, "You're still here. Keep going." And he did. He went to his appointment. He spoke honestly to his doctor. He even agreed to join the support group he had been avoiding. All because a young woman on a rainy bus had smiled at him with genuine warmth in her eyes. Two people, traveling on the same broken-down bus on a gloomy morning, each fighting battles the other couldn't see, had unknowingly carried each other through one of the hardest days of their lives. Kindness, Alma later realized, was never wasted. It always found a place to land. Sometimes on the heart of a stranger who needed it the most. Sometimes on your own, circling back to you in ways you never expected. And Thomas, every time he walked past that bus stop, remembered the young woman with the damp hair and trembling hands, the one whose smile had saved his day, just as his had saved hers. In the days that followed, both would continue their separate journeys, never knowing that their small exchange in the rain had built a quiet bridge of hope between two lives. Because sometimes, a smile is more than an expression. Sometimes, it's an answer. A reminder. A gift. And sometimes, it saves the day.